Hi everyone. In this lesson we're going to pick up where we left off in the last by modeling the boiler part of the locomotive. We have the blueprints in place, so now we're going to start the modeling process. So here we are in the perspective viewport. I'm going to hit L for left, and you see below the main train, I just made an image to make it easier for you to see what's going on. This is pretty much the profile of the boiler section of the train. So what we're going to do is go to Layer Manager, and Blueprints is the active layer. We're going to freeze it now, and you see blueprints turn gray. So what we want to do is go back, click on the blueprints, right click them, go to Object Properties, and turn off right here Show Frozen in Gray. Hit OK. Now we can freeze them, and they remain the image, but they are not selectable in any way. If I try to select, we cannot select them, so they're frozen. It's no big deal, it's just a way to keep them isolated. So now we don't want to be on that layer anymore when we're building the boiler. We want to use the boiler layer. So click on that little box, make the boiler layer active. You can close out the Layer Manager. And what we're going to do is we're going to build this boiler profile. So I'm going to do this with spline modeling. I know some people may be thinking, why not make a cylinder and subdivide it? Well, I think that's an abused way of modeling. You know, a lot of people subdivide things and it's not always necessary. Why drive up the poly count for the sake of subdividing a model when we only need detail in certain areas, like maybe where these seams are or the front? You know, by subdividing, all these large spans would become subdivided and quadruple in poly count every section. So I think it's kind of an overused method in some circumstances. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the line tool, and that is found right here under Shapes, Line. And you see down in Creation Method, initial type is set to corner and the drag type is set to Bezier. I think that's good for what we're going to do here. So what I'm going to do is roll in a little bit with the mouse wheel, zoom in, and I'm going to start right here. I'm going to click, I'm going to drag it out. When I get to this little seam, I'm going to click, I'm going to move up a little bit, click, and the same process down the line. Click it, click it. Now you can zoom out with the mouse wheel. We're going to click right here again. We're going to go up a little bit, click, zoom out, and right here. Now we're going to go flat right here, and we're going to come back to about there. Okay, and now you can see if I hit F3 on my keyboard, that's pretty much the profile of the boiler. So what we're going to do is go to Rendering, Interpolation. We're going to roll these out so we can see what they all are. Now we're not going to use this as a renderable spline because we're going to lathe it to make it into a shape. What we are going to do is go to the steps value, and it's at 6. And I think for this portion of the exercise, we're going to raise it to about 12 for now. And then what we're going to do is go into the modifier stack and hit L. That brings up lathe. This is the first thing on the list. Click that lathe. And you see it doesn't look right. It's actually lathing it around. Let's see, which axis are we around? Well, it's not the axis we want. So what we're going to do is try direction. We went to X, and now it is lathing around the right direction, but it doesn't look like the right profile. You can tell it's going lengthwise. And so what we're going to do now is hit the max button under Align, and then we want to expand this lathe in the modifier stack and select the axis. We just want to move that down. And what's happening is we're making that volume, that shape of the actual boiler. And you can see it's lined up with the blueprint. So now what I'm going to do is go to Perspective Viewport. I'm going to pan or rotate a little bit with Alt in the middle mouse button. And it looks like it's pretty good. I think it needs more segments because, again, we're not going to subdivide this model later on. We're going to keep it as is. So 16 segments is not enough. Let's try 36 for now. And F4. You see it looks kind of dark. It could be the normals. So you have a flip normals box. And you see just by checking that, now we have a much better view of what's going on. And depending on the purpose of the model, you can zoom in, and if you see some segmenting and you feel like you're going to be close up to the model, then increase the segments, maybe to 42. You can go higher, but just keep in mind that if the model is viewed from a regular distance and it's not being seen close up, some of those polygons are unnecessary, and because of the high detail level of the model, this may not be what you want to do, because it's just going to make the scene more cumbersome later on. So to me, this looks good. It looks like an acceptable amount. The profile's correct. We do have some things like when we rotate around, we can see right in here a little difference in shading. So sometimes what that is we have a vertex. I'm going to hit F3 again. And first of all, we may not even need that vertex. Let's just do this, delete it. See, I'm wrong, we do need that. But it seems like when I did that little step up, we didn't get it. So here's a good idea. Let's go to segment. It's a good way to show you how to use this stuff. And if we roll up over here, we have a refine button. It's down below geometry. I'm going to click on refine, and right next to that vertex I'm going to create another one just by clicking. And looks a little strange, but let's see what happens. If we take that vertex subobject level, move it up. Alright, so it's not lined up perfectly, but now if I move back, I think that might help. And let's turn the lathe back on. And that helped. See, now we have that step where we need it. And if we come back to this vertex, you can also, if you wanted to, toggle on show end result. What happened there is I kind of have a flat spot. It could simply be as much as moving this up a little would fix it. And if you hit Alt and Q, you'll isolate the mesh. I'm going to hit F4 to hide the wire. It's kind of a flat area. It's not bothersome to me, but if you wanted to, if you didn't want it to be there or be so pronounced, you go to vertex and you can right click on that vertex. It's set to corner. We can set it to Bezier, which as you see cleans up the shading artifact. Or you can use any option. Just keep in mind that when you change it to Bezier, you have curves now and you can change the shape. So I'm alright with this. So what I'm going to do is go out of isolation. Let's go back up the stack. Unhide all. You want to unhide all layers as well? I'm going to say no. Here we go. We have the blueprint and we have the boiler. And now what happens is, if this model were going to be viewed close up, we have some edges. Wherever these steppings, like the step in shape is, it gets a little bigger in volume. Those are crisp, clean lines. Well, you might not want that. So there's a few different ways to actually change the way that that looks. So what I'm going to do is go into the left viewport. I'm going to hit L, which is the hotkey. I'm going to roll into the first transition here where the boiler becomes a little bigger. And what I'm going to do is go down to the line. We still have show end result on. We can toggle that off for now. We're going to go to vertex. I'm going to scroll in to where the step occurs. And what we can do is select this vertex, and you have fillet. Now, because of the scale, we may be able to get away with using the arrows. If you click and roll up your mouse, you'll see that we have all these different. It's kind of hard to control though. So what I like to do, let's just put a value in here. I'm going to backspace that. I'm going to put 0.5. And that looks pretty good actually. It was a good guess. So now what we could do is if we turn the lathe back on, and we hit perspective, F3 if we're in wireframe, we don't want to be in wireframe. And I'm panning around, but it didn't seem to work so good, so you hit Z for zoom. And there we go. And now if we roll in a little bit, you can see that it has like a little glint of highlight, which is nice. That's a good way to do it. Normally I would probably do them all the same way, but I'm going to show you a couple different techniques just to give you options on what you can do. So with that said, we're going to collapse that lathe, and now I'm going to go to modifier stack. I'm going to hit E for edit, and you see these lists comes up, and we have edit poly in the list. Now when we click on that, we're going to have the ability to edit above this base mesh. But what also might happen is, right over here we have the keyboard override toggle. When we click on Edit Poly, it may change the way our keys work. So let's click it. Let's expand that, and let's hit Edge. Now, I'm going to go in, and because we have Edit Poly, we can edit this model as if it were an Edit Poly object, even though we have stuff below there that is still editable. And what I'm going to do is, at the edge subobject level, which is highlighted, I'm going to click this edge. I'm going to hit Alt and L, and that's a loop selection. Now, if Alt and L doesn't do what expected again, check this keyboard shortcut override toggle. For some reason, I believe in Macs we get default where some of the keys are going to do different things, and you don't want to hit P for perspective sometimes because it'll make your mesh planar. So just be careful and watch what you're doing as you work. So with that said, I did the edge loop selection. I'm going to roll down. I'm going to use the chamfer settings dialog. And you'll notice we have this nice floater now in Max. It lists out all the values that we want. So here we have the value of the chamfer itself, number of segments, the type of chamfer, open or closed, and then you can OK. You can add an iteration if you'd like to do multiple operations in one shot, or you can exit out if you're not happy with what you see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slowly just add a little chamfer. And that looks good, but it's kind of angular. Like if we were to render that, it's not going to get a nice glint from light. So what I like to do now is go in here and add maybe 2. Yeah, so we have 3 segments in that chamfer. That's going to give a nice roundness to it. So I'm going to say OK. And now go to the top of the stack, and if we zoom out a little, hit F4 so that we no longer have wireframe showing, you see it looks a little segmented. So again, you can always go into modifier stack, you hit S a few times, there's the smooth modifier. So let's see, there it is, smooth. If you turn on smooth, by default you're going to see a faceted mesh, but if you turn on the auto smooth, it's going to smooth things out, and you can adjust this threshold value if you need to. You can go up or down, it'll smooth depending on the angle of the faces. But that worked well, and you see that now the first and second transition area where we step up in size both have a rounded edge, but we used 2 different methods to achieve that. So this is working really well. I think that's a good way to show you what's going on. We're going to go to the next edge. Left viewport. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to go back to the Edit Poly. I'm going to select the edge. Now I'm going to go to perspective. I know I'm bouncing around, but this is how we do it. Going to Alt and L for a loop selection. See the loop got selected. And chamfer. And the cool thing is it's going to keep the value from the last time we used it. Now I had a little smaller gap there, so maybe I'll just reduce this a little bit. Everything doesn't have to be exactly the same. We're working on an old train, and I'm sure these aren't machine tolerances or any CAD data. They're just things that were built by hand by hardworking people. So I'm happy with the way that looks, and I'm going to say OK. And I'm going to back out. If we hit F4, let's go back up to the smooth. There you go. So, I mean, in a few minutes, we already have a majority of this model blocked out. I mean, there's still plenty to do to it, but you can see that, you know, the mass of that boiler is now established. It's a clean model. If we hit 7, it's 1200 polygons. That's the polygon statistics. If you want to adjust those, there's a plus sign here in your viewport. Go to configure viewports. If you go to statistics, there's some settings here. It usually tells you the total only. And what I like is total and selection. So as I have more models, I can select the model. It'll show the total poly count and the poly count of the selection. So I'm going to turn that on. And in this case, it's not a big deal. It's 1176 is the amount of polygons. So the difference between 1176 and 1224 is when we add in the blueprint and anything else we may have in place that would influence the count. So with that said, we're going to stop now, pause the video. We've covered lathing and splines, and we're going to continue in the next exercise. So thanks.